Hi everyone, and welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave, an offshoot of a podcast of Ice and Fire. This is going to be a very special episode on Robb, because during this great linear reread we've been doing, we felt like we didn't have really the opportunity to talk about Robb fully, as he doesn't have a POV. So that's going to be the subject of today. It will contain spoilers from the entire series, but not from the show. I'm Mary, Nymeria in the forums, and I'm going to be your host for today. I'm joined by Nadia.
Hi everyone, this is Nadia.
Scott.
Hey everyone, Scott, Shaggydog on the forums.
Also Jock.
Jock, Mundo Jock, here in the forums.
And Sarah.
Sarah and Lady Weaver on the forums.
And also a last minute addition to this team, Peter.
Hi, Peter Slayers 50 on the forums.
So we will be joined, hopefully, later by Matt and Tanja. So Robb is the firstborn of Catelyn and Ned, as we all know. He was born in 283 in Riverrun. 6 years later, Theon is brought as a hostage to Winterfell. He's aged 10, so there's a 4-year gap between Theon and Robb. And he basically has a nice childhood in Winterfell. We don't hear of anything too important. So we can start with talking about how he was educated, what he was raised to believe.
Well, I mean, I think Robb kind of had it, the most difficult, like any firstborn child has for any family. The parents don't really know what they were doing, and he gets all the pressure also from having to eventually become the Lord of Winterfell. So there's probably like a lot more intense focus on him, as opposed to Bran, who they expect to grow up and become a knight initially, or some sort of vassal lord to Robb. So he probably had a greater amount of book learning and protocol and things like that some of the others may have not had to have so much on, especially compared to like Sansa and Arya, Sansa, who's the second oldest, doesn't seem to have nearly as much going on, with the exception of her courtesies and courtly manner. But as far as education, beyond like recognizing just the various houses and things like that, when it comes to war and politics, Sansa seems to have missed the boat a little bit. But Robb probably had to be right in the thick of all that growing up.
Well, maybe it's just, the fact that Sansa is not learned in politics is just because she's a girl.
Yeah.
But I feel like mostly it's like the education decreases when we go further down the line. Like Robb had all the focus on him, and Sansa also had a lot of focus because she was the first girl and would need to be married to some lord. But then you've got Bran and Arya and Rickon, who's completely abandoned, but that's due to other factors.
I think they received kind of a similar education in the beginning because I think it's Sansa who's reminiscing about it, and she says that she learned history and everything, except that she wasn't good at numbers. So I'm assuming that they started out just studying together, but eventually, since Robb was the firstborn, I think that Ned probably took Robb under his wing after their initial education was complete, just to make sure that he knew how to rule and how to deal with the various bannermen, because that's a very important part of a feudal setup. You basically have to know your bannermen, how different they are from each other, how they fight among each other, and I think he must have been taught how to study each individual.
Yeah, my point was going to be that I think one of the biggest things to notice is, especially with the firstborn, how much of the parents' influence comes into play. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I have older siblings, and the oldest in my family, I would say she's probably the most like especially most like my father, but most like both my parents, or I can see the influence the most. And I would say the same thing with Robb. Like Robb, of everybody of his siblings, I feel like is most like Ned in the honor obsessed kind of tradition that way. Like he's so much Ned's son. I think you could see that with other characters in the stories too. I think Cersei, I guess, who's technically first, right, between her and Jaime. I think she's the most like Tywin, obviously, of any of them. She's got Tywin's ruthlessness and everything. I don't know. I'm trying to think of other firstborns in the story, but basically my point being that I think Robb, one of his biggest characteristics, most of his biggest characteristics, I think, have to do that are ones that he shares with Ned. I think that's not by accident. I think it's a big firstborn kind of thing.
I wouldn't necessarily say that he shares those traits with Ned, but he's trying to live up to Ned and what Ned has
I'd agree.
done.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Because he's only really had Ned as a role model in his life, a male role model. So he'd think that most men, and like when you're a knight or a lord, you should be like Ned. But he doesn't see people like Tywin or Balon Greyjoy or anyone else like that. He doesn't get to see other types of lords, so he thinks everyone should be like Ned.
That's a good point. By all accounts, Ned was a decent, Warden of the North. And, maybe I'm also being a little too harsh on Sansa because I keep forgetting she's older in the show than she is in the books. So the political aspect, I should probably give her a pass on because it's probably something that as she got older, they would have, warmed her up to and brought her into the fold a little bit more. So maybe I'm being a little too harsh on her there.
I don't think so, because her primary education was being provided at that point in time by Septa Mordane and Cat.
Yeah.
So I think her ultimate duty is, as horrible as it sounds, her duty is to be married off to some lord and produce children for him. That's what she's being trained for. If you ever read Sansa's chapters, and when she's thinking about what she's been taught by Septa Mordane and Cat, that's basically her goal in life.
Yeah, I think at that point that's her goal in life. But I think maybe down the road, Cat might have, taken her under her wing and said, okay, look, you're part Tully. Here's how you kind of, we've given you the basics, so to speak. And now you're kind of going for the advanced courses. Once you land in a certain situation, this is what you're going to have to do and be on the watch for this and that. So maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, because you see Cat all the time thinking about the political aspects and the social, issues that might screw up, her house and her family. And especially when she's traveling around with Robb, she's thinking about the political situations that are coming from things. So I think that's eventually something she would have imparted on Sansa, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I could be.
So we're joined by Tanja.
Yes, I'm Tanja, Scilens on the forums.
Okay, so we were talking about Robb and their upbringing. What about his attitude towards his different siblings? And also with Jon, I think.
I think their relationship is pretty interesting because even though it's obvious that Cat doesn't want to treat them doesn't want them treated the same way by everyone, but it seems that Robb is the closest to Jon since they're very close in age.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it seems like he was, just the typical older sibling with them. There's stories of, him playing pranks on his younger siblings with Jon when they went down into the crypts of Winterfell and led the others, and Jon jumped out dressed as a ghost. And, him and Jon also dumped a big pile of snow on Fat Tom the first time that the King Beyond the Wall visited when he was. So, he definitely had, it wasn't all seriousness growing up for Robb. He definitely had a good relationship with his siblings and, his half-brother Jon.
I think we can all agree that his childhood seemed to be pretty straightforward, pretty happy, learning, but also having fun with his siblings and like loving relationships mostly, even though it's the North and it's still harsh at times. I think we can go more into what we actually see in the books, which is from the start of Game of Thrones. So Ned leaves with the girls pretty much straight away, and Bran fell from the window or was pushed, or and so Robb starts having to take more responsibilities for what's happening in the castle, especially with Catelyn acting kind of crazy. So that's what we see a lot of him in these few chapters in Game of Thrones, mostly Bran chapters once he wakes up, and also Catelyn when she's joining with them. So what do we think of his attitude towards his bannermen, the way he prepares for war, and the way he changes from being a 14 years old teenager to basically Lord of Winterfell?
He does a pretty good job. Like, even with Edmure, he's quite careful not to give him all the proper respect and so forth. For example, he told him to hold the river rather than order him to hold it.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty crazy and really well done how George shows like a lot of his maturing and how he grows from like that first, like one of the first times I think that we see him really in that fight in the yard with Joffrey, like in the training yard. He acts like a spoiled little brat, kind of just like Joffrey to a degree. But then you see him over time, like have to stop like whining or being a boy kind of thing, and it's really well done in the sense that like you can see him just gradually feeling more and more responsible, and actually like I guess I would say he does a pretty good job of like meeting the bar as far as like more responsibility, having to worry about, because like I mean Catelyn's his mom and also there to help her a little bit, but and then later on a lot, but it still has to fall on his shoulders to a degree, and I think he does a pretty good job of starting to understand those responsibilities and realize them, and not losing his heart during all that process. Like he still cares so much for Bran and for everything else going on. I think it's pretty interesting.
I think it speaks a lot to how he was raised, because it does very much seem like he was raised towards taking over these responsibilities at some point, not as soon, but he was kind of getting ready for taking those responsibilities over anyway, and that seems to have worked fairly well.
I agree, but also at the same time, we see how he's not really, self-confident in things that are going on. The scene where he dismisses Lewin and says, "Hey, look, I'll take care of the appointments tomorrow," and he sends him on his way. It shows that he's, a good leader and that, he's gonna take care of things and, step up to the plate. But at the same time, then he turns to Kat and he's like, "Help me! I do not know what I'm supposed to be doing here." And he just has that lack of confidence that he doesn't have, mostly probably because it's just a lack of experience. But he does kind of admit that, he's completely not ready for the mantle of leadership and to take up the gauntlet and run everything on his own. He flat out admits he needs help, and we see that from him for quite a while too.
But I don't think that means not being ready for it. I don't think you have to, like, no lord takes up all these responsibilities on their own. They have, like, everyone has plenty of people to help them. So I think he needs to realize that this is a normal thing, and I think the problem here, if anything, is that he feels like he has to do everything on his own, and feels like if he doesn't, then he's failing, when that's not actually the case.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think it's a lack of confidence. It's more like after he's made a certain decision, he does doubt it, and when he does, he turns to the person he's closest to, and the one he knows is not going to judge him for having doubts in the first place, which is his mother. And I think that's quite natural for a 14-year-old who's suddenly been pushed into a position. But I think that when he is faced with, having to make a quick decision, having to, deal with his bannermen, I think he does that quite well with a certain amount of confidence.
I don't know. I disagree a little bit. I mean, in part because, when he turns to Kat and, for that validation, she's not there to give him that validation. Like, yeah, you're doing a good job. No, she's hemming and hawing over Bran, and she's having her like sort of family crisis and crisis of faith. And then there's a scene later on after he calls the banners and Grey Wind bites off the fingers of the Great John, that Robb is telling Bran like he was absolutely scared shitless that the Great John was going to straight up murder him, and he's kind of happy that it just sort of worked out and things are okay, that he's a supporter now. But I think it kind of, I wouldn't say he's faking it until he makes it, but I think it's just a matter of he's been trained to do these things, he's going down them, and then after the fact he's second guessing, and he doesn't have his mother there initially to give him that validation or anybody that he can confide in securely. And that's not going to make him look like, my God, our leader doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So I think that's part of his problem.
Well, I think in a feudal society, they really couldn't look unsure in front of your banners, because they would probably just ruthlessly try and have you removed. Look at this Bolton, for example. So you kind of have to focus on just using your family for advice, or maybe your close vassals like Lewin and stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Exactly. If he showed any lack of confidence, they would not take him seriously, especially considering that he's only 14. They would just dismiss him outright, and they would not listen to him.
Or they'd use him as a pushover and have him just be a figurehead as well, quite possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they also might not have ridden off to battle with him, too. I mean, if you think, if he's called the banners, and then the guy who's supposed to be leading the army doesn't look like he knows what the hell he's doing, these lords are obviously going to talk. I mean, they've all been assembled, so at some point, some of them are going to go, this guy, he's got no chance. We might want to rethink this and, not have to deal with it, but it pans out for him, so.
I think part of it is luck. Then the whole thing with the Great John is that Grey Wind is here and reacts, and it looks like Robb is the one in control of all this, but it's a bit of luck as well. But it's like the training is just kicking in, he doesn't necessarily know what to do, but he does it because he's been trained for this. And I think this whole evolution is quite normal. The fact that he needs help at first and always has a bit of doubt for his various decisions. That's all right at this stage. It works well for him up until a certain point. Matt, you here?
Hey, what's up, everyone? So what are we talking about?
Robb.
No shit. We're talking about how Robb assumes more responsibility, and what do we think of his performance as Lord of Winterfell?
Well, I mean, he doesn't fuck it up, right? So that's good.
Well, in the beginning, when he starts to take over from his father.
I think it's interesting I've always, and that's a point that I think Michael wanted to make also, is like, what was the whole end game for the Stark campaign. And even from this point, when he calls the banners and they prepare to leave for war, it's like Lewin is actually advising to stay in Winterfell. And this all started after a letter from Catelyn. And then there's obviously the fact that Ned has been taken prisoner by the Lannisters in King's Landing. So I feel there's no adequate reaction. It's not like he had a lot of choice, but from this point on, he's at war with the Lannisters, and it doesn't seem like there's any way to end it.
I think his end goal when he first marched from Winterfell was simply to get Ned back. That was his goal. And until the Lannisters executed Ned, it stayed that way. After Ned was executed is a different thing. I mean, that's up for debate. Was he trying just to get back at the Lannisters? Like, was he motivated by revenge? Or was it that he was suddenly crowned king in the north and then he had to, make himself seem even more powerful than he is?
I think he was trying to stop the Lannister's ability to hurt him while also getting leverage on them so that he could trade it for his sisters.
But the thing is, the problem with that is he was never going to be able to trade Jaime Lannister for his sisters because, Jaime Lannister is way more important than two girls, unfortunately, in their world.
Yeah, but if he keeps on fighting, he'll get more people captured and then he can trade them for Jaime as well.
And I don't know about your guys' different spots in the story, but it seems like also he kind of, his motivations might not always be for the girls. I think that Catelyn kind of has to remind him a lot. Hey, remember Sansa and Arya? Hey, remember Sansa and Arya? We can't necessarily do this. Like when, especially after she sets free Jaime Lannister, he's obviously at first really upset with her, but then she and others have to be like, but imagine if it was your daughter. Like, think of your sisters. Like, remember that, and then he's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're like, I understand a little bit more now. I don't know.
Well, I mean, doesn't
maybe Tywin
initially it's just this idea of like this stark honor, right? Like that he's trying to like act upon to preserve or protect or.
Yeah, but like from the very beginning, when he leaves with all his bannermen, I mean, the plan is indeed to capture either Jaime or Tywin to trade them with Ned, basically. But it's a very big campaign. I mean, you have to go to abandon the north, basically, and go in the Riverlands, and we'll see how that goes. So I feel like from just the situation, it was kind of doomed from the beginning. It escalates so quickly that I don't see how this could have resolved, really.
I thought initially, like, they just wanted to, like, call the banners, march down to King's Landing, show, like, a strength of force to get Ned back. And then, because Tywin decided to, like, burn the Riverlands, they kind of got diverted and had to, like, go to River Run and, because that was surrounded and kind of help out Edmund.
Yeah, I think you're close. Initially, like Robb is following Ned's orders because Ned does, tell Cat to tell Robb to, to prep for war, and Robb does that. He goes out, he, meets with the vassal lords, and he starts, mobilizing things and getting things prepared. And then when he finally marches out, the goal is to get Ned and the girls, and also to put an end to the fighting in the Riverlands, which was started by the Lannisters. So that's his initial goal. That all changes once Ned gets executed, and the value of the Stark hostages outweigh the value of the Lannister hostages. So they kind of have to sort of figure out the whole succession issue because the political situation changed on them as well. And you had, other people claiming to be the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. You had Stannis, then you had Renly throwing his hat into the ring. So realistically, it's a goal that initially had a purpose, but then the purpose kind of changed once the campaign started.
Maybe it's because many of the lords may have seen it as after Ned had died, not seen a purpose in the campaign, so he probably would have had to go all in on the King in the North just to keep up the heat and maintain his force.
Well, I think it's a combination of Robert dying and Ned being executed, where it's just like there's so much turmoil. They're like, well, this little shit Joffrey isn't going to be our king, so let's get a new one. Like, had Robert lived, first of all, Ned wouldn't have been executed. But even if, like, I feel like Robert was more the established king than Joffrey, and everyone was just like, well, this fucking monster can't rule us, so.
Well, I think the big issue is that once, he lifts the siege on River Run, there is a question of the succession to the Iron Throne. And they're having that big meeting in River Run where they're discussing it with the River Lords and, the Northern Host Lords. And, some of them are saying throw in with Renly. Some of them are saying, because they're pointing out, like, Renly's with Highgarden. And Robb flat out says, no, we can't do that. Bran can't be the Lord of Winterfell before me. Renly can't be the king before Stannis. So he is kind of very much his, following in what Ned would have done. And then they just kind of make him the king of the North and the Riverlands. And then I think Robb's tactics change about that.
Yeah.
His solution changes to just kind of stay out of it and be autonomous. And that's kind of like why he declared independence. But I think that was more of a ruse than anything else.
Yeah. And are we doing like a historical parallel kind of part of this discussion?
We can, if people have interesting stuff to say, I guess.
I was going to say, well, this is pretty much like embodies how Robb represents not only Edward IV, but also his father, Richard. Both, they're like the historical parallels between the War of the Roses and the War of the Five Kings is pretty like well established. But, once Richard of York was executed along with his son Edmund, like Edward had to like really step up, bring the York army down, and fight against the Lancastrians. So that's part of the parallel. The other one is, when at the Red Wedding, when he gets murdered and has his head chopped off, same thing happened with his father Richard. They paraded his head around with a paper crown on it.
Paper crown doesn't sound as bad as having the head of
That was
your
a wolf
wolf.
head?
So, yeah.
Oh boy.
I'd prefer the paper crown.
I think the other thing just to keep in mind also is that like when the objective does change, kind of like what you're talking about, Scott, they still aren't like, Robb, you're king of the Seven Kingdoms. It's just still, you're just gonna be king of the North. Like, you're king over us. Like, I don't, like, because all the other, squabbling over succession is about the Seven Kingdoms and the Iron Throne. It's, the distinction still should be remembered that it's obviously like, they're not trying to claim with this the Iron Throne itself for Robb. They're just trying to go back to leave us alone, kind of. We'll be our own thing.
Well, leave us alone, except with the Riverlands, and like the idea of an independent northern kingdom works, but the North plus the Riverlands, I mean, it's undefendable.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I agree.
And also, my aunt could come too if she ever decides to come down to the Erie.
Yeah.
I just don't think there was much of a plan for it. I think everyone just kind of got swept away a bit, and it was one of those, we'll crown you.
Because it gets mixed in with the whole we still need revenge on the Lannisters thing.
Yeah, and it's more of a like, you'll be king now, we'll figure out details as we go along. Okay. Which is maybe not the best plan. England.
I think Robb becomes king just simply out of happenstance. I don't think he plotted or, schemed like, oh, check it out. Now that my dad's dead, I'm totally going to own the Riverlands and the North. But so I mean, I think I saw
someone on the dock suggest that maybe him and Brynden like kind of plotted together to do that. And I don't buy that at all.
That was FT Word questions.
Yeah. So Thomas, I don't think they plotted at all. I mean, even later said like when they crowned me king of the North, I was like, oh well, I'll be a just king and be friendly to my friends and fierce to my enemies and whatever.
I don't think he did, but I think the Great John did. I think the Great John had planned it.
No, I don't think the Great John's that smart.
Well, couldn't you say that about Wyman Manderley?
Well, he's not that smart. That's exactly why he would just, some crazy ass notion crosses his head in the middle of a council. Okay, well, I'm following that guy then. He looks like he's doing something right. Anybody with me? Yeah, let's go. Problem solved.
I think Wyman Manderley is smart. And we find that out.
Yeah, but other people would call him stupid.
Because he's fat, people think I'm lazy and stupid.
Yeah.
Didn't you say like something like that in Dance of Dragons?
Yeah, to Davos.
Yeah.
Well,
but couldn't the leader be thinking the same about Great John?
No, I just thought he was a frat boy.
Yeah, he's a bro dude. He steps up, gets his ass kicked a little bit, and then he's like, oh, well, that's my guy. Tough as shit, little kid.
Yeah. I better make him king before his wolf eats the rest of my fingers. So,
yeah.
No, but so here's a question that I've wondered for a while. If Stannis had won the Battle of Blackwater, do you think Robb would have set aside his crown to win the peace? Because there's a quote.
There would have been a discussion.
Well, yeah, there's a quote that Robb has when he's, basically getting pissed off at Edmure for stopping Tywin from marching back into the west. Lord Stannis was about to fall upon King's Landing, Robb said. He might have rid us of Joffrey, the Queen, and the Imp in one red stroke. Then we might have been able to make peace. So, I mean, I think he actually would have set aside his crown and just been like, okay, I'm Warden of the North, or maybe your hand or something like that. And then, you get the Seven Kingdoms.
Well, yeah, I think, like I said, it would have been a discussion. Stannis, being as hard as he is, already said, like, well, your son's also a fucking traitor, and he'll get his when I get into my crown. But I think there may have still been a battle, but like there would have been a discussion about, well, okay, are you king of the North, or will I go back to Warden of the North now that you're the rightful king and I recognize that? And, whereas Renly flat out tells him, like, he could call himself king of the North. All I need is like obedience. Like, call him whatever he wants.
I think the problem would have been that even if Robb had wanted to make peace, the thing is that it was his bannermen that crowned him, and they wouldn't have wanted back to being, subordinate to the Iron Throne. So.
Yeah, but once they get their revenge on the Lannisters, because let's face it, if Stannis becomes king, there's no way the Lannisters aren't going to get brought to justice, like all of them. So I think they might have found a peace through that way somehow over time. But do you guys think like it would have come down to Stannis versus Robb, and their hosts had the Lannisters been defeated at Blackwater?
Maybe, depends on what happens. It's only the respective. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think they would have worked out a peace, but maybe
Yeah.
I'm too optimistic, maybe. But yeah, I mean, Robb's position is very different from that of Renly or Joffrey. I mean, we said it. He doesn't want the Iron Throne. He just wants justice and revenge on the Lannisters, at least at first. So I think it would have been a harsh discussion with Stannis, because he would still have considered him a traitor for declaring himself king, but they would have made it happen.
Is your question literally that if Stannis won Blackwater, would him and Robb then like gone to war against each other? Because I think absolutely not.
Yeah, that was the notion, was that because that's what Robb's quote seems to be like. Robb remaining king of the North seems to be more of like an issue of the succession to the Iron Throne from that quote. So it kind of suggests that, hey, look, once Stannis wins Blackwater, wipes out the Lannisters, then okay, Renly's already dead at that point, so it looks like it's pretty good. It's definitely Stannis. So the question is, does he set aside his crown to make peace with Stannis and say, hey, look, guys, it's we set out for vengeance against the Lannisters, we got it, and now it's time to make peace.
I think that's absolutely what would happen, especially if you look at what his plans were with the whole thing with the stone mill and how he gets so upset with Edmure. Like, half the whole reason he gets pissed at Edmure is because it doesn't allow Tywin to come out west. And his whole thing was like, hey, if we drew out Tywin west, we'd be obviously fighting him in his own lands and everything. But it also would pull him away from King's Landing, and that's when Stannis could have won at King's Landing if it wouldn't have been for you and your idiot. Because you held him up, he was able to go back and save King's Landing and stop Stannis. Like, he was half the reason he was pissed at Edmure, I think, was because it didn't allow, because it was able to allow Tywin to stop Stannis at Blackwater. So I think he was fully on board with, and would be totally okay with Stannis being on the Iron Throne, just as long as justice for his dad and all that stuff was on the table. Really, if he was able to beat Tywin, that was kind of his goal. Beating Tywin is what he cared about, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I really agree. I think it probably would have been I don't know really how his bannermen would have reacted to that, because I have a hard time figuring out their motives. Like, in that sense, Bolton is, I mean, he's straight out betraying him, so that's fine. But the other are just following, which is good. I mean, that's what you expect of Bannerman, and they have a real big loyalty to Ned and everything. So what would they still have followed Robb to make peace if the main goal was revenge for Ned? Probably, except maybe a few ambitious ones.
So long as all of the Lannisters are, justice has been brought, I guess you could say, and some vengeance, then Cast Dark probably would be okay with it.
I mean, he would probably still be crazy, but not crazy against Robb, so...
Yeah, or Robb could always say, okay, you can go have battle to the death with Jaime Lannister. End of it. Everyone's happy.
So I wanted to mention also, like, the very beginning of this is the deal he makes with the Freys to cross the river with part of his army. And so that's a very important deal, obviously, because that's the deal he breaks afterwards. Was there any other, I mean, do we think they could have crossed without making that kind of a deal? Like maybe not promising Robb's marriage?
Yeah, I think Kat kind of gave away way too much in that one particular deal. They could have, negotiated for something better, and Robb, but again, Robb is also really young at this point. He doesn't even send back a counteroffer. Kat just basically tells him, like, hey, look, if you want to cross this bridge, that's what you got to do. And at that point, Robb has already split his forces, and his entire strategy on, lifting the siege on River Run kind of depends on this. So he's just like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Which, I mean, it kind of indicates, it's a sign of his youth and inexperience, but he probably also didn't at that time expect to become King of the North and the Riverlands either, so.
Was I would say, the Great John strategy, I guess, basically just whenever there's a problem, just being like, oh, we'll kill him. Basically, was there ever on the table with this, him just being like, hey, Walder Frey, do this, let us cross, or I'll burn your whole house down, basically? Did they ever discuss, through the twins?
I think that sometimes it's not very obvious how many men Walder Frey has. But I think at one point, this happened very recently in the reread. There was this one chapter, I think, after the Freys had betrayed them. Sorry, right before the Freys left. I think Edmure is recounting how many men Walder Frey has sent with Robb, and it's in the thousands. He sent a lot of cavalry. A lot of his sons die in their service. So I think when Great John says we'll just kill them all, I don't think that's possible because Walder Frey has a very large force, and he's holding 2 castles on either side of the river.
At that point, you also kind of want to make sure you don't establish yourself as someone who will do that to their own bannermen, essentially, because he's still very much relying on people following him.
Walder Frey,
if he sets this kind of example,
Walder Frey isn't his bannerman, but I suppose he is his grandfather's bannerman, so that counts as something.
Yeah, no, sure, yeah, but I still think if Robb sets that kind of precedent, I think it might make some of his men less loyal and more concerned.
I totally agree. I'm not saying he should have done it. Walder Frey gives him thousands of men. You're right. But I just want to know if it was, even on the table. Or, even just threatened him. Was a threat ever pondered? Where it's just, I don't know. Maybe probably wouldn't have worked.
I don't think he ever actually seriously considers, storming the twins because, one, that's another battle he's going to have to fight. And part of his plan is kind of timed based. He has to send Roose out to draw Tywin off to the Battle of the Green Fork while his forces cross at the Twins and then get to River Run to lift the siege. And he was kind of counting on the fact that Frey would just allow him to cross because Frey is Hoster Tully's bannerman. And then, Frey extracts this toll from him, which he was like, all right, fine, I'll do it, whatever. So I don't really think that sieging the castle was a big issue. And nobody actually ever brought up the notion that, Walder Frey is actually, being a disloyal bannerman by not, just allowing him to cross for free and lifting the siege on his own. But I think it's more of a. I think Robb at that point has a more of the ends will justify the means, and all things considered, it's not that bad of a deal or that bad of a price to pay, and he gets a bunch of more swords. So
Yeah,
win-win.
fair enough. I totally think he made the right call with this, but yeah, I was just playing devil's advocate, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like he does mention at one point, he's like, well, I'll pull the towers down, like, around Walder Frey's, like, ears or something, and Catelyn's like, does one of her Catelyn, like, how can I make him see, like, the right path, and then fucks him with a negotiation that, basically gives away, like, every Stark child to the Freys.
And to be fair, most of the stuff that Frey was asking for wasn't all that unreasonable. So, it's not like he asked for everything under the sun. He just asked for a couple of marriages. Robb to have a new squire and a couple of kids to be warded at Winterfell. So I mean, it's not like he's like, oh, give me a tract of land all the way up to the neck. No, he's just asking for some simple stuff.
Yeah. I think marriages in this case are not that much to ask. And at this point, Robb is not a king. He's he's not even the
That's
lord.
right.
He's Ned's son, basically. So it's not too much to ask for.
Actually, Nadia, you bring up a good point. Like, if Robb eventually does become Warden of the North after Ned, and he ends up marrying a Frey girl, there's a lot of Freys like who may get kicked out when Walder dies. So they may be looking to set up like holdfasts of their own, and the North is friggin' huge. So Walder may have been thinking that this might be a good way to get a bunch of his children additional lands as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And also, I think someone just mentioned, like, Walder wasn't being a good bannerman. He was, because I think he's still, like, technically, like, oh, well, I'm, representing my king, not just the Tullys. I think he says something like that.
That's what he did say. He said Joffrey was king and that the Starks were technically traitors.
Yeah.
Well, they technically are.
Yeah. And as well with this whole deal, you have the fact that I don't think Robb's marriage was terribly high a price to pay when the Freys gave the Stark army 4,000 men, and that boosted the Stark army from 18,000 men to 22,000 men. So it's actually quite a significant number that the Freys are giving to Robb.
Yeah, that's true. But also by the same logic, okay, if the Starks are traitors, why is the Lannister army invading the Riverlands? Riverrun shouldn't be under siege if it's just the Starks who are the traitors. What did Hoster do to you jerks? So
I'm not sure if Walder Frey really cares about this. It's more the fact that he has the power to ask for stuff because he holds the bridge, and for this reason alone, he's been given a pass for years and years. I mean, everyone expects him to be kind of a bad bannerman and not doing things for free, even for his own liege lords. So I think it's an excuse for him being like, you're traitors. I'm talking for Joffrey. He just has the power to ask for stuff, so he does.
Yeah, there's no way he actually cares about any of this. Like, he just cares about whatever gives him the most benefit.
Yeah.
And the only reason the Lannisters are even fucking up the Riverlands is because Catelyn took Tyrion. So, and she being a Tully, that's why they got involved, right?
Yeah, it's a mess.
Trust me, when it comes to cat fucking up everything, I know. My cat hate is strong.
Well, so after that, they're going to Riverrun. The plan actually works out well because they free Riverrun, capture Jaime. Bolton is on the other side of the river. So the plan worked out well, but his army is still divided in two, and with Bolton at the head of one half. And that's very, very early on in the book, like by the end of A Game of Thrones, that's decided. And it's really important for the rest of it because he chose to send Roose Bolton with part of his army, and which almost gives him a free pass to just making decision. He can do whatever he wants without Robb there to just check on every move.
About that, I have a question. Do you know why Robb didn't leave anyone with Roose Bolton just to keep an eye on him? Because he could have left Theon Greyjoy or he could have left Catelyn.
Catelyn was the one that was like, wait a minute, he wants to send the Great John with a foot? Well, how can I make him see something that, like, she's like, she basically makes him choose Roose to lead the footmen, which is another reason why, the cat hate is strong. She really guides him to fuck everything up.
I mean, the reason why he chooses Roose is, he basically says, that guy scares me. So let's send him with half of my army alone. I don't see the logic in that.
It's because he wanted Roose to take on Tywin because Roose would have been his most experienced commander that he had there and the most cunning, so it did make sense. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't have sent someone with him, someone he personally trusted, just to keep an eye on Roose. It didn't have to be Cat. It could have been, if Roderick was there, it could have been Roderick. It could have been anyone, just to keep an eye on Bolton to make sure that he wasn't double-crossed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He sends Roose because he's matching experience of Tywin in the field, and Roose is an experienced campaigner. He served in the rebellion under Ned. So, there's a little bit of history there of Roose actually campaigning and being around. Plus, who else does he have?
Not many people at all.
There are some other bannermen, or at least sons of bannermen with Roose Bolton. He's not entirely alone. Just it doesn't seem like anyone is sent there with the actual command. Keep an eye on him.
Right. Robb entrusts the army to him, so he entrusts Roose to make smart and wise decisions. And for the most part, Roose does. He prevents Tywin from winning the battle at the Green Fork by not falling for Tywin's trap. So he manages it pretty well. So, initially it pans out really well, and yeah, down the road things start going wrong, but that's down the road after Roose realizes that things might go the other way. Initially things are working out swimmingly for him.
Yeah, I think in terms of choosing someone who has the right skills to make this work, I think it's actually a good decision. If it wasn't for the treason, it would have worked out, I guess. That's kind of a big deal. So
a little bit of treason.
Kind of a deal breaker.
A little bit, yeah.
He's cold, he's calculating, he's cunning. No way will this end up poorly for me. Send him against Tywin. That'll work out great.
With the Battle of the Green Fork, a lot of Robb's commanders that Bruce had with him actually got captured as hostages. Like Lord Serwyn, Willis Manderley, Harrison Karstark, and Four Freys all get captured as hostages, and then Lord Hornwood dies there.
To be fair, the Battle of the Green Fork wasn't supposed to be tactically, a smashing victory for House Stark. It was supposed to just be a feint move to draw Tywin out and away to prevent him from, sweeping in and reinforcing Jaime Lannister at River Run. The goal of that whole splitting the army was to draw Tywin off so that they could lift the siege on River Run and then add the forces of River Run to Robb's army to, then deal with whatever
was that
future
a sweeping victory? Because Bolton almost got completely destroyed. It was only because Tywin panicked when he found out about Jaime.
No, Tywin didn't find out about Jaime until after the Battle of the Green Fork, when he gets back to the crossroads.
Yeah, I thought this was retreating a bit, but he got information that I was one of the people. He pulled back instead of chasing after this.
So anyway, the Frey deal wasn't such a bad deal, and it all worked out quite well, even sending Roose to fight Tywin. But I don't think Robb really thought it through. Really, it was a rash decision. Like, I need to do this now, so that's what I'm doing. But in the end, he got stuck with this deal, and well, it was his own mistake to break it, obviously. So they free River Run, they capture Jaime, and the next part of the campaign happens, and we already mentioned it a little bit. So Robb's plan was to draw Tywin west by attacking the Westerlands, and so this kind of falls apart when Edmure goes out of River Run to stop Tywin at the is it the Red Fork this time? Yes, I think so. And so the plan falls down. So we already had a lot of discussion, I think, on the reread episodes as to the way Robb handles Edmure, and was it fair to be so angry with him for leaving Riverrun when he hadn't made the plan clear to him. So maybe we can talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I was wondering if he had explicitly told Edmure Tully to let Tywin through. Would it have been too obvious to Tywin that this is a trap if he had just sort of like gotten free passage? Is that why they didn't tell Edmure? Because they were so sure that he'd lose?
Well, politically, he couldn't. It would be a slight on Edmure's honour if he did just straight up order him to let Tywin through.
I think it's a more of a situation of happenstance, because when Robb marches out of Riverrun, he's marching off to Oxcross, where Sefford Lannister is trying to raise another Lannister host. And Robb knows Robb shattered Jaime's army, they scattered. So he doesn't want to let them back into the fight. So he makes his way to Oxcross to basically put down, that army of trainees to prevent, Tywin from getting reinforced and resupplied. And then while he's there, he can start raiding in the Westerlands. I think that's where that plan to draw Tywin out comes from. So I don't really think there was any communication to Edmure other than, hold Riverrun. And if you're Edmure, okay, hold Riverrun. Well, Riverrun isn't just the castle itself, it's all the lands that are associated with it. Yeah. So I think Edmure, with the best of intentions, does what he thought was best, but it just kind of undermined what Robb was trying to do. And it looks like Robb's plan was going to work, because with Tywin marching into the west, that's drawing him into the Westerlands. So that gets him away from the upcoming Battle of the Blackwater with Stannis. And if Tywin doesn't show with the Tyrell Alliance, Stannis wins that battle, and Robb wins and then Robb can figure something out from there with Stannis. But it gets undone by Edmure.
Literally,
that was the plan, right?
It's the saddest thing ever that this doesn't work. He was totally gonna win. It was. Totally
and then why blame Edmure for that? He didn't know the plan. They didn't send any ravens to alert him of the plan. Then what's the point in blaming him? He didn't know any better.
Well, the argument is that he was told to hold Riverrun, and he did more than that. But I feel that's not a very sound argument.
I mean, he's the acting lord of Riverrun, of the Riverlands. That's what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, protect his lands. I agree.
Let me ask you this. Did the Tallhearts or the Serwins or anybody who died in other battles, did they know the entire plan? Do you think Karstark knows the entire plan at any point? I don't think that all of his other lords necessarily knew this whole big master plan or anything like that. What makes Edmure so special that he has to know every single thing about what's going on? Hold Riverrun. Do your job. I don't know.
See, but the thing is that the entire plan hinges on Tywin actually arriving in the Riverlands.
And I think you could very easily
he has to pass through, he has to pass very close to Riverrun.
And you could very easily see this going differently, where the plan would have been different or whatever, and that would have ended up being a really good move. And if he had decided not to do it, people would then have blamed him for that. So I think Edmure did the best thing he could, given the information he had. And I don't think it's fair to complain about that.
I'd say, to your question, Peter, is did anybody else know fully the plan? Well, yeah, Brendan the Blackfish knew it because he laid it out for Edmure when they get back to Riverrun. Was Edmure entitled to know the plan? I mean, that's a 50-50 call. First of all, he's the High Lord of Riverrun, so he's, technically not just some guy that's like a minor, lord. He's like a major lord of a major castle. Secondly, he did also get his ass caught by the Lannisters once before, so there is justification of, not telling him the plan so he doesn't accidentally, give it up under torture or any kind of, interrogation. So, I mean, it could be either way, but we don't. But all that we know is that he was never told about it. I think the plan didn't come about until after the Robb's already in the Westerlands, after the Battle of Oxcross, and then he's like, hey, look, there's a lot of castles and holdfasts around here that I can just completely raid and sack. That'll draw Tywin over here. That sounds pretty good. Let's cut him off from his gold mines. That sounds like fun.
If you have a plan, then part of executing that plan successfully is to think about who you have to tell in order to make this work. And I think it's just a poorly executed plan on Robb's part, not to make sure everyone who could fuck it up knows about it.
Yeah.
All right. I understand. I'm not trying to put all this on Edmure or anything. Edmure is not the reason this all failed. I'm just saying, if you have orders, do your job.
But if you get a really good opportunity to do something even better that you weren't ordered to do because people wouldn't have known that this could happen, I don't know, that this opportunity could arise, then you'd still be blamed. Then you could still be blamed for not having done it in a different scenario.
And to be fair, it's not like Robb wasn't able to communicate, because Luwin receives a raven at Winterfell, which was sent from Ashmark, which is in the Westerlands. It's one of the castles that Robb takes before he takes the crag. So it's not like he didn't have access to ravens or communication. So he could have very easily sent a raven to Riverrun and said, hey guys, just a heads up, let Tywin march on through. So yeah, maybe it is a little bit more on Robb than than.
Though I can also see, I can maybe also see a point for not sending a raven, because you don't want that information intercepted. I don't know.
They're not geographically, they're not that far, so they're gonna send a messenger.
Yeah, he can send a messenger.
I wonder if he did, and maybe the Flays or something stopped the messenger.
Someone would have mentioned at some point.
Yeah, and why would the Freys be stopping the messenger at this point? Well, apart from being opportunistic, shady people, but actually, I disagree, Scott. I think part of this plan was already thought of when they left Riverrun, because he leaves for Oxcross, but at the same time he sends Catelyn to negotiate stuff with either Renly or Stannis. So there was the idea of wanting to make an alliance with one of the Baratheon's brothers at least, and bring Tywin to the west, so that would leave them alone to get King's Landing. But maybe it wasn't entirely conceived until after Oxcross. I don't know.
I don't think it was conceived until after Oxcross, because they have to pass the Golden Tooth on the way into the Westerlands, and on the way, Greywind finds like a goat path that they can travel like single file on a horse. So that enables Robb to then get the surprise attack on Oxcross and then the rest of the Westerlands. So that's my thought on it, because if he doesn't find his way past the Golden Tooth, then he has to fight his way through it, which would take longer. So I don't know. Maybe it's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other, really.
And maybe the idea was already there, but the plan was not like fully in motion, which also makes sense. Like you wait to be in the field to see if it's doable, but you had the idea before.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, Robb definitely seems to be a person who carefully considers intel, studies maps, and weighs out the strategies before, making a dedicated move. So yeah, that's absolutely a good point.
Well, so now he's winning in the Westerlands, and so we get to the point where he arrives at the crag and meets Jane. Yay! We're all so happy for this amazing love story.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Teenage boy love, like Brett would say.
Yeah. This is the best. Okay? So imagine, alright, you're a 16-year-old kid. You are, like, on the biggest war high of all time. You keep winning battles everywhere. You keep smashing Lannisters whenever you see them all over the place. You take this castle at the Crag. You get an arrow in your arm while you're attacking the Crag. And so you gotta rest up, and this really hot other 16-year-old girl just gets to, like, make you feel better, and you get to just start to maybe have a little bit of sex during all that. Sounds pretty goddamn awesome to me.
Yeah,
But-
you just forgot the part where he learns that his brothers were killed by his best friend.
That's
but
obviously the downside.
In his home castle when it was
That's
burnt down.
obviously the worst.
It's
That is obviously
consolation
the worst.
sex.
Yeah. Everything minus learning that your two younger brothers have been killed by Theon.
it's the dream, right?
Yeah, this is where just everything turns, and it's really awesome. So I guess this is where I'll jump in. So there's an amazing quote from Tywin in Tyrion 1 of Storm of Swords. You guys are probably familiar with it, but it's like some battles are won with swords and spears, others with quills and ravens. It's just amazing. So when he's like given like slight hints to like, oh yeah, I am totally bringing down Robb. This is when the whole stuff for the Red Wedding starts, but like it's perfectly executed because of how unbeknownst it is to Jane and Robb. I don't know what you guys think, but I'm fully on board with like Jane and Robb both like genuinely really like each other and genuinely want it to work out and genuinely love each other a lot in the teenage way. And I can kind of run through a little bit of this, but basically in Cat 2, that's when Robb finally comes back to Riverrun, and when they all meet the Westerlings, and when Catelyn meets the Westerlings for the first time. And this is also like when he does that thing in the Great Hall where he kind of sets her up and like makes her like, this is when obviously he's found out about Jaime being released already, but he like says this thing where he's like, I know what it is to love so greatly you can think of nothing else. And she can't disagree with him about that. And so it's basically his tacit approval for when he's later like, oh yeah, by the way, I married this chick, Jane, and she's totally the worst possible thing that could have happened for us, but whatever, it's cool. She can't be like, oh, well, I shouldn't have. I released Jaime. I did it for love of the girls. So it's kind of the same kind of thing. But yeah, Jane, she from the beginning is just like cute and adorable, and it's like, I want to be a good queen. Robb is like super aware of like the impact, like that's like an added thing that he immediately gets as he feels totally responsible for Jane. He says, for love of me, Jane may lose all, because he's like super aware that like this is huge treason against the Lannisters, like for them to do this. And he's really naive about it that way, obviously. And the other things to think about, Grey Wind hates the Westerlings and is like really anxious and doesn't like them and growls at them, all of them, not just Jane, but everybody. And Jane is super anxious around Grey Wind. So just early spoilers that bad things from this would be happening. And then the other amazing Tywin quote is in a Tyrion chapter in Storm of Swords later, and he's like, Westerling is her mother's daughter and Robb Stark is his father's son. We're just like, boom, I am working Sybil Spicer, and because of that, it's all over. But basically, Jane's drinking herbal tea with like milk and herbs and ale in it. I don't really know how that works, but they're having all kinds of sex, and she wants to give him a son. And 2 times, Kat says how great her hips are, how nice they look. Twice, not just once, not just minor error, George. You said it twice. But then, so then later on, when they leave Riverrun, he says goodbye to her 3 different times, and she's being all teenagey, and she's super sad, and it's super sweet. She's crying, and she could come with him, but she can't. And he's like, Robb's like kind of pissed that like he doesn't know if he got her pregnant or not because he knows how badly he needs an heir. But my question, I guess, is to you guys is like, how much do you think that Robb's sulkiness, basically over breaking up his promise with the Freys, impact how he, in those same chapters, has to deal with Karstark betraying him? So like, he's like all embarrassed and sulky about, oh man, my honor is like, I messed up my honor. I totally went back on the Freys by marrying this Jane Westerling chick. Do you think that makes him like that kind of place of embarrassment about his own honor, like that sulkiness makes him react the way that he is, this hard line, like, oh, I gotta get it back. Karstark has to die. I think that sometimes I didn't really realize it until I was doing this reread of like how much that might have come into play. Obviously, he talks about it with his people, and they talk about the different things to do about Karstark, but like I didn't think about that aspect of how it literally could have to do with that.
That's actually a really interesting what you said, because you have Robb actually say in the chapter, quote, "He killed my honor," about Karstark. So it definitely could be a compounding factor on how he decides to treat Karstark, because Robb's already broken his own oath, and then Karstark killed someone that Robb really is meant to protect and keep safe.
Yeah, but there's a difference between breaking a marriage vow and, like, you know, murdering. Like the latest guys that he killed, they weren't like knights in the field. They were squires, right? They were also prisoners. So
yeah.
So I mean,
though is like,
and then it took like 4 guys to like take down like a couple of 12 and 13-year-old kids.
The thing though is like how embarrassed he is about Jane Westerling from the beginning. Like he shows up at Riverrun and hides her kind of, and like doesn't even introduce her to everybody immediately. Kind of everybody kind of knows who she is. He feels like super embarrassed and like he knows he fucked up. Like he knows he fucked up.
No, he introduces her flat out, and along with the rest of the Westerling family. They're on the dais at Riverrun with him, and then it's only when Kat comes in that he kind of has to. He feels like he's facing the music with her. But for the rest of everybody else, like they probably heard anyway, because the phrase, like, you know, we're marching off anyway.
Oh yeah, they all heard before.
He's not sheepish or embarrassed by it. He just doesn't want to face his mom about it.
If you read, he has multiple parts with Kat where he's like, I know this screws us. Like, I know I messed up, but like, I love her. I feel like there's an underrated tone of him being like kind of embarrassed about it, but he doesn't really care that much because of how much he loves her. So he's just like, screw this.
But does he love her, or does he just love her childbearing hips?
The question.
Can it be both?
The question of all questions.
I think he does love her to
I think
the
he
extent
does.
that you can really love at 16. I mean, you can, but it's like a first crush, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think it's genuine for what it's worth.
She was also there for him during like probably the hardest news he's ever gotten, right? When his 2 younger brothers die. That's a huge emotional connecting moment. Not just them like banging it out all the time.
Not to mention, she also nursed him back to health, and
exactly.
You know, we're talking about a time where, you know, it's not like you could just go to the local hospital and get a shot of penicillin. It probably took a little while. So, although that must have made for some seriously awkward conversations, like, so Jane, miss your dad? Yeah, he's in jail. My jail. Oh, sorry.
It actually gives Jane great reasoning to actually try to get with Robb to make sure her dad is released, though.
Yeah,
it's all crafted. It's fake.
I'm
it's
not
a love
as convinced
potion.
that Jane loves Robb as I'm convinced the other way around.
Yeah.
I think she might, but
let's
I'm
get
not
into this.
sure.
I think she's totally
Guys,
manipulating him, and like Maggie the Frog was known for love potions, and then that's her grandma, so love potion 99.
Ooh, okay, so your team.
I'm team Jane is manipulating everything, or love potion.
Okay. I think the only big evidence you can have really against that, which I think is strong, is how like she genuinely cries lots of tears about Robb, and like when he's leaving and stuff, it's like real emotion.
Because she knows he's gonna die.
I don't know. I mean, she also doesn't have to come to Kat and be like, "Hey, how do I be better with Robb? Like, how do I?" She doesn't have to do any of that stuff if she's just manipulating him.
Yeah, I
she's
agree.
expected to.
She wants Robb to get jiggy with her so she can have a baby who will be the heir to Winterfell, so she has a claim to all of the North.
But she doesn't come to Kat for advice about having a baby. She comes to Kat asking how she can comfort Robb after he's executed a man, which is, which isn't necessary to do if you're just manipulating a guy into,
Exactly.
Yeah, when we were discussing Jane's motivations, when we were thinking that when we were doing the reread and we were discussing why Sybil Spicer might have betrayed Robb even before, she didn't necessarily have to tell Jane to seduce Robb. She could have just told him that, get close to him, try to make him love you so that he frees your father. And that would have been enough motivation for Jane, right? She didn't have to
Not
know
even
about...
that. All you have to do is be like, hey, go take care of this guy and see what happens. Like, Rob's
even that
a
would have been
nice-looking
enough.
kid. Like, you can just be like, hey, this guy's wounded. Take care of his wounds.
And then every 5 minutes gossip about how hot Robb is, and be like, did you see him?
Yes. That's exactly what you do.
Yeah, I really don't think that Jane was a part of her mother's plan. Like, I don't like the idea that the few times we witness her talking, like when she goes to Catelyn, and after that also, I don't like the idea that this is all lying to us. I mean, usually, like, we can have, even though we don't know exactly what's going on, and a lot of characters are obviously lying to each other, we can be kind of prudent about it. Like, we feel there's a weird vibe going around some of these characters, but not Jane. Like, the issues are with her mother, her brother. I mean, not her brother, but her uncle, I think.
Yeah.
But then Graven is anxious around Jane as well, right? He's not outright hostile, but he is anxious around her.
No, it's Jane who's anxious around Greywind.
Yeah, I think Greywind is mostly unhappy about Rolf Spicer.
Yeah.
At least there's a point about that in the book. They don't. I don't remember if he's also unhappy around every Westerling, but I don't think so. I think things are going pretty well with the younger brother, who's the squire, and it's mostly the uncle and the mother.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that if Jane had possibly been told, if she had been told about the Red Wedding, then wouldn't Sybil also have told her son, Reynold Westerling? Because he goes down fighting, like he's the one who cuts Graven free, and then he's shot with multiple arrows and he falls into the river. If he had any idea, he's the Knight of the Seashells. If he had any idea that this was, that his mother was in on it, wouldn't he have not done that? Like, to try not to die?
Not dying is usually pretty high up on every character's list of things to do. But, I agree.
But, just, kind of stay away. Not try to free Graven,
But maybe the mother herself didn't know the extent of the plan.
The last we see of Sybil Spicer, she doesn't even know what happened to her son. Like, she's asking Jane for information.
The way that I imagine it went down was her writing a letter to Tywin first, being like, hey, so my daughter, Robb Stark, it's a kind of a thing. What should I do? Because she's freaking terrified of Castamere, Tarp, and Rain stuff happening to her. We got it in the bag, basically, trying to save their own asses.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, to be fair, and from her point of view, this is a pretty gutsy move, and she is likely to come out, ahead of the game either way. Lord Westerling is Robb's prisoner, so she can just flat out say, look, Robb took the castle and he took us all hostage. And he said, I'm marrying that girl, tough shit. Westerling didn't even give his consent. Robb just married her like the day after they hooked up. So it's completely out of his, ability to have a say in it. They can basically just like wash their hands of it, and he can say, no, I totally didn't want to have, my daughter marry a treacherous scumbag from the north who took me prisoner. So they leave themselves a great opening to be welcomed back into the King's Peace under the Lannisters, and that's what happens. You see them at the end when Jaime takes Riverrun. They're going back to the Westerlands. So all's well that ends well, I guess, for them.
Except if Jane's pregnant.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? The whole conspiracy theory about Jane being pregnant and being hiding somewhere with the Blackfish, right?
I'm like 70% sure that she's pregnant.
I'm 100% sure she's not.
And they even talk about, like, it's one of those things where George, like, in the books will talk about, like, oh man, like, Robb's talking to Kat, being like, I'm so bummed I couldn't get Jane pregnant. She's like, yeah, sometimes it just takes a lot of times, and who knows if it's gonna happen or not. What a bummer. Such a shame that you weren't able to do that. And then it's like one of those things that we would later find out, oh wait, it happened. Because this is George.
How long were they married for anyway? Because it'd be about a month before she knows anyway whether or not she's pregnant, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Same
all
question.
reacting like it's something, immediately, like right after sex, like, oh, still didn't work. And that doesn't make sense, right?
And Catelyn got pregnant immediately, right? I mean, Ned didn't stay that long at Riverrun before
No,
leaving.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's at least the story is that, yeah, they conceived Robb right on their first night, and then he left.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean she knew immediately.
Well,
Yeah,
hold on.
exactly. She couldn't know for another one.
How about this? Here's my crackpot for the day. Ned was able to warg into his own sperm to make sure that Robb was conceived.
No way.
He was a sporg.
What the fuck?
What? Why? Why is this happening?
Confirmed.
Oh boy.
How the hell do you even confirm that?
I don't know, but it's confirmed.
I just said it. And you
Don't
confirmed
answer
it,
that. Do
so-
not answer that. I do not want to know.
But okay. Do any of you think that the swap is real?
No.
Yes.
Well, see, the thing is,
Maybe.
Yeah, I think
That's
it
a good
might be
spectrum,
real
yeah.
because, again, Jane's hips, the difference in, the appearance of Jane's hips. Because
Twice.
Kat notices it twice, right? That she has good hips. And then Jamie
Italicized the
Lannister,
last line of a chapter.
Twice.
We just did this
Yeah.
with the reread. It's like he made it a point. Like he changed the
exactly.
font.
And then Jamie Lannister thinks that, she's too slender for that. And I think that, George saying that it was just a mistake is just like, J.K. Rowling saying that RAB isn't Regulus Arcturus Black when it really was, So it might just be George covering up, because he didn't want to give too much away. I don't know. I think she's been swapped.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
she definitely hasn't.
I'm with you, Nadia.
Definitely has not been.
Oh, Scott, tell us why you think not.
Well, first of all, you have to look at the two characters in the point of view. They're both looking at Jane Westerling, but Kat's looking at her like, okay, what are you going to do for my son, Robb? Okay, so she's going to size up things like, her hips and, what kind of person she is, or, her bloodlines and all that kind of thing. So yeah, Kat's going to notice that and she's going to take count of it. It's just something she's going to notice. When Jamie gets to Riverrun, he's like, oh, wow, I get to meet that chick that Robb totally pissed away a kingdom for. And then he's seriously let down. He's all like, wow, she doesn't look anything like my sister. Why would he give up a kingdom for her? But Jamie's like looking at her as like, is she sexy? Is she hot? Is she attractive? And he's just like, oh, she's okay, I guess, but not worth giving up a kingdom for. He literally thinks that. So yeah, he's going to have a different take on, sizing up her body because he's looking at her from a sexual point of view, where Kat is looking at her from, okay, this is now not only my queen, but also my daughter-in-law. I really hope she can secure the dynasty. So, no, there's an absolutely different points of view. And so, yeah, of course they're going to have different takes on Jane Westerling's hips, which are italicized. So, yeah.
Well, exactly. My point is then why, after he's compared it to Cersei, after he said, she's not worth, giving away a kingdom for, why would he so specifically note her hips? Why? Why would he do
Boom. Also,
that's what he's into.
If he's looking at her from a sexualized perspective, good hips are kind of a thing you're looking at,
Yeah, body shape. I mean, who doesn't, like, when you're looking at someone sexually, size them up physically? Everybody does. He learned it from watching Tyrion.
My point is, like, he points out the slenderness of the hips in the way you say, in a way that he's like, oh man, what a bummer these aren't better, kind of a thing. That's what points it out. That's when it's like, wait. Every other description we had was how great these hips are and where'd they go. I don't know where. Where'd they go? I don't know, man. I think it's straight up swap city.
No. Completely no. It's a woman sizing up another woman and a guy sizing up a woman as, I mean, that's the total difference. Women look
I agree,
at other
that's
women
not the same
differently.
thing.
Yeah, unless they're gay or whatever. But so but we know both those characters aren't. So there's
Gay
no
or
like
whatever.
actual. Varley, I'm not going to judge you or anyone else.
We could probably move past this. people are gonna have their own opinions, but Jane is.
Yeah,
still
exactly. We're not
I
going to
think
change anyone's mind.
yeah, I think this has been debated quite a lot already in different podcasts for sure.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I have a point on Robb and Jane and why he married her before we move on, which I know you
sure,
want
go
to do.
ahead.
Yes,
Go
please
ahead.
say it.
Okay. So I have a theory about one, why Robb got jiggy with Jane, and that's just because he grew up with Theon, and Theon has been talking to him about all of his sexual encounters, like in a graphic manner. And then Jane is really the first female that he's had a chance to do anything with, because every other time he's had Theon around and all the chicks would really go to Theon because he's older and more experienced, or his mum's been around. And then Kat's pretty on the ball and would be like, no kid, ixnay on the sex. And then my main point about why Robb would actually marry Jane is that he's been raised with Jon and has seen how Kat's treated Jon all of his life, because we're told that the first time Kat actually calls Jon by his name is when she tells Jon that he should be the one in the coma, not Bran.
Mm.
So he's always been seeing Jon being abused by Catelyn. So he'd think that any bastard child that he has, he'd actually probably want to raise it because that's what Ned did, and he's still living up to that. And then he'd think that his wife would only be abusive to a child that isn't their own. And then that would be why he'd actually marry Jane.
I think that's actually a very good point, but I still think, I mean, he doesn't even know that she's pregnant. I feel like if she was pregnant at the time and he knew that, I feel like it would be much more justifiable.
I totally agree with your points. The only thing I would point out is he does have that line where he says, when Kat's like, wait, and you married her the next day? And he was like, I had to make an honest woman out of her. So he, feels it's the honor duty thing again, too. So that's in there as well.
Well, isn't there also a social aspect of, noble women who get married off before, who aren't virgins? Like, I can't think of the name of the Florent girl that Robert slept with in Stannis' bed, but doesn't it take her, forever to have, another arrangement set up for her because she gave birth to Edric Storm?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have Lolas Stokeworth as well, and it's a lot harder to marry them off if they have had sex before.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like he had to
Poor
do it
Lawless.
because she was a member of a house. I'm pretty sure that him and Theon went to the brothels because there's this one they're riding through the brothel town and Theon's like, oh, that's Kara. She screams like a weasel or something. He's like, dude, chill. I'm like, Bran's right here. We'll talk about it later during bro time.
Can you imagine those conversations? You raise a good point, Sarah. It's those kind of reasons why he would marry her, I think. Plus love, plus teenage love.
Oh, yes, best kind of love.
Really?
Unless it ends in your very bloody death and your mother's and, everyone you know.
Awesome. That was
See,
worth it.
it's a good story, though.
Yeah, it's like Romeo and Juliet. Everyone dies.
Yeah, but that's not what you're looking for, right? In a relationship. That's not Romeo and Juliet. I mean, that's not what I'm looking for.
But I feel like as teenage love, it's definitely what you're looking for. The most dramatic, self-centered, fine, I'll die then. Everything's overly dramatic.
Would that be John's version?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of,
We
kind
skip
of.
that.
But I refrained from saying it, but I'm very glad you said it.
Good effort, Tanja.
I know, I did so well.
So we also mentioned here Grey Wind's reactions to the Westerlings. So maybe it's a good time to talk about Robb being a warg.
Well, as previously discussed, he was conceived as a warg sperm, so obviously that power him.
Obviously.
So, in the very first chapter, you have that Robb is supposedly the person who actually finds the direwolves, apart from Ghost, but he doesn't really count. But he finds the other 5 direwolves. And then you have Robb saying that Greywind was restless too. Sometimes I think they know things, sense things. Robb sighed. I never know how much to tell you, Bram. I wish you were older. So I actually think that Robb's getting a lot of Grey Wind senses already. That's all within the first 400 pages. But I think he's already bonding with Grey Wind a lot, and he's starting to get his senses. And then you also have, in that same chapter, it's the one where you meet Osha, and you have the wildlings and the deserters of the Night's Watch attack Bran when he's on his horse. And the reason why Robb left Bran was because he said the direwolves had made a kill, so he went off to get the stag and bring them all back. And that's the reason why Bran was left alone, but he couldn't have known that the direwolves had made a kill because they'd only howled.
That's a good point.
So I actually think that he might be seeing a bit of like double vision like you get with Jon or with Bran. So I actually think he is full on warging.
It's a good point. I agree. I think all the Stark children, apart from Sansa, who has lost her wolf, they're all more or less warging. Just Bran is the one who does it the most consciously. But those are good points. I didn't really think Robb was warging that much, but I guess maybe he is.
So my only issue with the Robb being a warg thing is that, like, later on, once he's king, like, once he's not a kid anymore, once he's King Robb, he starts getting this, like, I'm the man kind of thing, and he has all these quotes where he's like, screw whatever Grey Wind's thinking, like, I'm the king, I gotta do what I gotta do. Like, he's just like, I don't know, he doesn't trust his wolf's instincts near as much later on. So that's kind of the biggest bummer in the world.
He has like a what is it called? Cognitive dissonance. Yeah, about him, like, where I think he even says at one point, he's like, I am not a wolf, like, you know, no matter what they call, like, everyone says, like, I'm the young wolf, whatever. He's like, I'm not a wolf, I'm a person. He's just getting these, like, weird kind of feelings where he's not quite sure what to make of them, and he's kind of, like, you know, settling in with them, whereas, like, with Bran, we see him kind of be like, yeah, okay, thank you, Jojen, I am a warg, like, it's cool, I'm in.
Definitely. I think Robb actually starts rejecting it later on because you have all of his men and all of his enemies calling him a wolf and saying that he eats the people he's battling, he turns into a wolf. Everyone's spreading rumors about it, so I actually think he's rejecting Grey Wind because of that, so he's trying to separate himself from it to stop all of the rumors. Because remember, in the Seven Kingdoms, being a warg is a terrible thing. It's very bad. You don't want to be one. Whereas north above the wall, it's okay with the wildlings. So I actually think he's faking it and rejecting it, and that's why he stops bringing Grey Wind places. So, like, yes, he'll still fight with him, but with the Westerlings, he knows Grey Wind's saying no or, like, suspicious. So he stops listening to it because it's like, no, I'm not going to listen to you, Wolf. This is my decision.
Really, I love that you have him conversing with the wolf. It's like, listen, Wolf, no.
Do you think that since, you know, a lot of people theorize that the old gods were the ones who sent the direwolves to protect the Stark children, do you think that's why Robb gets killed? Because he sort of rejects his identity as a warg,
No.
and sort of pushes Grey Wind away, and doesn't let Grey Wind protect him the way he's supposed to?
I don't like that idea because it would mean that the only thing that counts is magic and religion and stuff like that. So, well, I think it's way more interesting to.
I didn't necessarily mean it in a magical way. I just meant that, you know, he didn't keep Grey Wind with him. So if Grey Wind had been in that hall, things could have turned out very differently.
Yeah, but to be fair, do you really think Bolton and Walder Frey didn't have enough guys there to kill them both, even if Grey Wind had been in the hall?
Oh yeah. They could definitely, because even direwolves are susceptible to arrows, but it would have been a more even fight then. Although I don't see what if we're letting in Graven.
Anyway, yeah.
But Robb could have at least put up a bit of a. I just meant that Robb was the one who didn't even want him there.
Well, at this point in the story, we have so many things going against Robb. There's the Red Wedding plan, obviously, but also Stannis throws leeches into the fire thing, and Karstark cursing Robb with his last words, and all of that. So everything is doomed from this point on, and nothing is going well. So it's definitely part of it. It's like everything converges so that Robb dies.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think he rejects Grey Wind and the whole warging thing, also because he thinks that Bran and Rickon are dead and that their wolves didn't protect them. So why would Grey Wind protect him? So might as well not listen to what his senses are telling him anymore.
That's quite possible.
So I think there's a couple points we still have to talk about, which are more on the meta point of view, meaning that we need to talk about Robb's legacy. So I guess we can start with the conspiracy and the will.
Do any of you think that there was any other option for Robb? Because I don't. I mean, when Bran and Rickon are dead, Jon is the only one left, because Robb is right. He can't leave it to Sansa, because then it would just be in the hands of the Lannisters, and the Arryn cousins are too remote. Like they're not even a part of the North.
Right. So I think do you like, however you feel about Robb now, when the will is eventually disclosed and it's either Jon or it is one of the Arryn cousins, like how will that like change your perspective of like Robb's thoughts? Like, do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, is there one outcome that you'd be like, oh, right, Robb was a good guy, and then another outcome where it's like, oh my God, he really didn't know shit. He was an idiot.
But Robb has already designated Jon as heir, right? He actually wrote down the will and had everyone sign it.
Well, we don't know exactly what's on the will, right?
You don't
We
know
just
that.
Well, we do, right? Because that's his argument with Cat.
You just know that he was thinking about Jon, and he wants it to be Jon. And that's probably what it is, but that's not 100%.
And
right,
it's not confirmed.
Guys, you also have Jane says that Robb had wrote a letter, but then he burnt it when he was being all depressed. So he might have actually written it and then not burnt that specific letter, but burnt something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's just until it's confirmed. Like, is there an outcome that would change your, either if you like him more, or if you like him now, you're like, oh my God, like he really had no clue.
Yeah, I think if it turns out to be one of the Arryn cousins, I'd say he had no clue at all. Yeah, I think the only right option at that point was Jon, because he's the only son of Ned Stark left.
Wonder if he did something bonehead, like named Benjen, and didn't know that Benjen was still lost.
That's what I was thinking, possibly. But
he had no way of thinking that Benjen had been found. Like,
there are some people, and I am not one of these people, but there are some people who believe that he put Catelyn down. Some people think that it might be Catelyn in his will.
The necrotic queen of the North comes for you. I cannot see that happening.
I can't.
Is that why she's like fingering the crown, like when Brienne, when she's trying to hang up Brienne? Like, doesn't she have Robb's crown in that scene?
Does. Yes, she does have Robb's
crown. It's my crown.
But then, if we don't know whose name Robb wrote down, then Kat doesn't either, right? Because she doesn't see the document.
She's there when he has them all sign it, so she can see what it says. I mean, I'm guessing it's like the thing on like the last page or something.
I mean, she's not one of the bannermen, right? She's not asked to witness it.
Right.
She's there, though.
I think she's getting pushed out of the tent as like everyone's signing or whatever. I think it's something like that.
Maybe. Yeah.
She's like, oh, she's on her way to Seaguard after the twins because get the fuck out of here, Cat. You're useless.
Oh my god, man.
No.
Plus, he wouldn't have said cat, he would have said mum.
Mommy, help.
But
what do I do now?
what do you guys think of his plan with Moat Cailin?
Should we take the north, you mean?
Well, specifically Moat Cailin, yeah.
Or
I think it's
attack it
good.
from the north side while distracting the soldiers with his main army while the Clagnar men get over the other side, which is less defended.
Exactly. Do you think that's actually possible?
Well,
Yeah,
I
'cause
mean,
I think so if he gets Victarion distracted with a huge army.
yeah.
Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
I mean,
Like when he's talking about his
I think
plan?
it's a good idea, and then we see what conditions that they're in. It would have been like fucking. They could have walked up to the front door and taken it.
Well, Moat Cailin's really vulnerable from the north, so yeah, if he can find a way to get troops on the northern side and come down while there's a distraction on the southern side, then yeah, it's absolutely going to work. I mean, that's one of the ways in which the Ironborn took Moat Cailin in the first place. So yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, everyone's like starving to death and getting bitten by fucking poisonous snakes and poisoned arrows and
Right.
And then Ramsay flays them.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yay.
Question: do you think Theon would snap out of it if Robb came? If Robb came to where Theon as Reek was? Because he might actually, because he spent most of his life around Robb 10 years, and he's thought of Robb as a younger brother, so he might actually snap out of it.
I don't think he would, because
No
unless
way.
like snapping out of it means losing his head to Robb's sword, because
Yeah, exactly.
True.
And he would like feel so he would be like overcome with guilt on seeing him after betraying him. I don't think that makes you snap out of anything.
But it might make him stop thinking of himself as being Reek and start thinking of himself as being Theon.
A piece of shit.
Yeah, piece of shit. But he's an interesting piece of shit to read.
Well, actually, maybe you have a little bit of a point there, because he does start snapping out of it when he's hanging around Winterfell and people start going into the crypts with him, and they start talking about his experiences with how Stark and some other people start relating tales. So yeah, it may have served to humanize him for the nanosecond that Robb was able to maintain self-control before snapping his neck.
Robb might not recognize Reek as being Theon because he has changed so much.
Maybe, but I mean, I can see Osha not recognize him because he's also been away for a number of years, but Robb and Theon lived together for like a long, long time, so
yeah,
maybe. Oh, did I say Osha? Sorry.
At least you didn't mix them up by their show names. Okay, sorry, I sidetracked that. So back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, so supposedly the will, I mean, there's a few people sent north with the will, right?
Do you guys actually think they made it to Halland Reed?
I hope so.
Or you think Ewan has it now?
I really hope so.
Do we know how many copies of the will Robb made? Was it just one copy, or did he make multiple?
I think there's 6 of them or something like that.
And didn't he send like false instructions as well in case?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. He made like fake ones in case they got caught.
But then how after Robb is dead, how do you differentiate between the false ones and the true ones?
The true ones is whatever happens.
But he's like, yo, I only trust you guys because you will know. Yeah, like he just tells them with his words and then gives them fake ones because if they got caught, he doesn't want them to be on paper something true.
Could you imagine if they all had goldfish memories?
Oh my gosh.
Excuse me?
Like,
oh my gosh.
if Robb tells them all and then, like, in, like, the 6 months since then, they all forget everything that he said and they're like, Robb told me something important. What was it again? What am I meant to be doing?
For all we know, they've been wandering in the neck and being like half crazy with poisons and stuff, and just.
Or if they get amnesia.
I mean, for as hard it has been for the North Remembers / Grand Northern Conspiracy to even take place. If it's true, you could make the argument that they do have such shitty memories because they must have freaking forgotten about everything. Hashtag F the Northern Houses. They freaking suck.
Hashtag the North forgets.
See, but the thing is,
Literally,
that
North
the
forgets.
people who received those orders from Robb still haven't resurfaced, right? Mage Mormont is still missing.
Galbert.
And and the Glover guy is also somewhere in the.
Well, its brothers in
the
White
neck.
Harbor.
That's right.
Oh,
Which
right.
might be why you have Wyman Manderley actually moving all of his forces and actually doing everything at Winterfell and Frey Pies and stuff.
Well, Manderley
Also,
knows
at this point,
that,
Wyman Manderley has more information than Robb, right? He knows that Rickon is alive somewhere.
Yeah.
Exactly. He knows both Bran and Rickon are alive.
Wyman Manderley is a genius.
I love Wyman so freaking much.
Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah, this
I like his
whole-
granddaughter.
Dude,
Yeah, the granddaughter is
making
amazing.
your enemies into pies is the most badass thing I can
Ever.
kind of think of.
And then eating it and enjoying it, that's...
And then literally eating it in front of them. So badass. I can't even...
Sweeney Manderley.
But literally, why do Robb's... I don't know. I guess the whole effort is screwed over anyway after the Red Wedding, but like everybody in all the vassals freaking forget. I don't know, man. That's what
there's not that many left, right? There's obviously Roose Bolton, who didn't forget but also doesn't give a shit about what
but did Roose
Robb wanted.
Bolton even know because he wasn't with the rest of their forces? Because
obviously,
And the Great-Johns
he
in the
doesn't know about
dungeons.
he doesn't know about Jon, but yes, there's the Great-Johns in the dungeons and others. I mean, he's not the only one who has been captured, and so basically everyone who was really loyal to Robb, I mean, ostensibly and visibly and present with Robb, has been either killed or captured. And there's a few people just lost in the neck, like Mage Mormont.
Well, I mean, like essentially, everyone thinks that like House Stark is no more anyway, right? So they have no other option really, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess.
And that's why like Wyman wants to bring back Rickon, so it's like, okay, we gotta start back in Winterfell.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's more so that he can just, shit all over the Boltons, as opposed to trying to reestablish the Starks into Winterfell. I mean, and then likely position himself to, be, a greater lord of the North than he already is.
Be the regent?
And he deserves it.
Yeah. Actually, I'd be all for Wyman Manderley being regent of the North after getting Rickon back at Winterfell.
There you go.
He deserves it. If he gets rid of the Boltons,
Yeah, if he gets rid of the... If he's the reason that they get rid of the Freys and the Boltons, I'm totally down.
Getting rid of the Boltons and the Freys, one bite of pie at a time.
Literally.
There you go.
And the thing is that White Harbor is like the richest part of the North, right? So Wyman Manderley also understands money, and he has the navy, and he's a very powerful guy. So it makes sense to make him the regent.
Yeah, but if he takes out the Boltons, and since Hornwood's no more, wouldn't he control every river into the north?
Yeah, he'd be like the entire like east coast of the North, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Except Karstark.
Karstark's now Thenns, right?
Yeah. Well, Harrion's still alive, apparently.
Yeah, but isn't he just like hanging out in like Harrenhal, like just moping about?
He's
somewhere.
He's still a prisoner.
Oh, that's true, because the North, that's actually another big point, is that there may be a lot of, brand new, minor houses just popping up from all the wildlings just showing up, so they're going to have to deal with that somehow. So maybe that's, maybe that could be like a unifying factor at some point.
They need more houses right now, because a lot of them have just simply been wiped away in all of Robb's battles.
And anyway, they need more men up, down at the north for the wildlings. But they need more men anyway if they want to fight the Boltons or the Boltons and the Freys and the Lannisters. They need more manpower, 100%. And if the wildlings are it, welcome them in and get them killing people.
But why would they need to fight the Bolton and Frey? I mean, essentially, there's a peace between everyone now, right? Everyone's on the same page. They're all down to the Iron Throne. Bolton's Warden of the North, Freys, Riverlands.
The Manderleys don't know that.
No, they do.
They just don't care.
They're not gonna go along with it, but they know that you know Bolton's in charge, and peace is declared. You got to go to Winterfell, and just do your role, and no more rising up against the Iron Throne. That's pretty much it.
The threat is really Stannis right now, right? And that's where we left it.
The threat to Bolton.
Yeah.
I think it's both, because at this point where we left it, I mean, Winterfell is in mayhem because of whatever inside killings Manderley has been doing, and Bolton sends out both the Freys and the Manderleys, thinking, well, at least this way, maybe, I mean, they need to get out of there, otherwise they're just gonna kill each other right there in the castle. So, I mean, if the Manderleys join up with Stannis, they have more manpower and maybe even enough at least to take down Bolton.
And as well, if they meet up with Stannis, they can get rid of the Freys while they're out there, and then that's already cutting Bolton's force down significantly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think another thing that is part of Robb's legacy that ties in with the northern issue is that the Frey name is basically absolute shit to everybody who happens to be a northerner because of the Red Wedding. I mean, breaking guest right is completely sacred.
Didn't really bite them in the ass yet. Hopefully in wins they get their shit rocked, but as of right now,
that's kind of Manderley's plan, right? It's that if he can bring Rickon back.
Yeah, Manderley literally being the only one who is a badass and does stuff.
But if Rickon comes back, everyone in North is gonna be like, well, I'm not done with it anymore. I'm just let's go kill Freys.
Yeah, you think he was feral before? Wait until he comes back from Skagos.
Wait.
Oh God.
Dude.
Well, I don't think the plan is to wait until Rickon becomes of age that he can rule on his own. They just need him as a figurehead to conquer the North in his name.
Yes.
So as long as they can be like, look, a boy and his wolf, he must be Rickon, because he's too grand. So.
I mean that's part of what Roose himself is trying to do with the fake Arya plot, is to gain somehow some loyalty from the legitimacy and loyalty over the northern lords, because he has a Stark. So see, it's all right. There's a Stark in Winterfell. But obviously, I think Rickon is going to work better than a fake Arya.
But I think it'll be much harder to convince anyone that Rickon is to either set up a fake Rickon or even get support for the real Rickon, because he's sort of confirmed dead, right? I mean, people thought they saw his body, whereas Arya was missing. She wasn't confirmed dead, whereas Rickon is.
And
that's why he really counts on the wolf thing.
No, but as well with that thought process, Rickon was only 4 when he's been presumed killed, so no one will really know what he looks like seeing him again, because kids change a lot when they're younger, so a year or 2 would make a big difference in how he looks.
Well, that's why Manderley was so insistent that Davos find Shaggydog and bring him back with Rickon, because Shaggydog is the proof.
All right, name dropping yourself.
Yeah,
there's no
even
vanity
if they don't
here.
remember what the child looked like, they'll remember what a very violent direwolf looked like. They'll definitely remember him.
Yeah.
Well, that's gonna be like Osha coming back, being like, "I was the wildling that helped him escape."
I think it'll be a good enough excuse. I don't necessarily think people are going to need overtly solid proof, just good enough proof, because people don't like the Boltons in the first place because they're the Boltons, and people love the Starks Also, the Boltons are allied with the Freys, and the Frey name is absolute shit. So, it's a good enough excuse, and it may not be 100%, but it's really close. And sometimes close is just good enough. I don't think they're going to let, perfection and absolute legitimacy get in the way of good enough to, work for us.
Do you think that Rickon will actually come back though?
Just tell him Rob's there.
His dog is called Shaggydog.
Hell yes.
Yeah, which I just found
Shaggydog.
out what Shaggydog means, like in literary sense. So that kind of
story goes nowhere.
You gotta believe in something. Rickon is coming back riding Shaggydog with an army of Skagoti behind him.
On unicorns.
Yes. Okay, so I just checked the linear timeline, and it's only been about like 8 or 9 months since Robb died at the end of Dance of Dragons.
Oh, really? That's really recent.
It
Yeah,
means
exactly.
Jane could have a baby.
Yeah, she could still be.
Oh, she's like super preggo right now, right?
Yeah, she'd be super pregnant or have already given birth.
Do you guys have any thoughts on how this reread and the fact that we don't have any Robb POV impacted your vision of him?
I love Robb so much. I always will. I'm obsessed.
Okay, Jane.
I'm obsessed with Robb. This reread made me feel even worse for him. He just wanted to. He did his best, man. He did his best.
Did it bring it all back?
Yes, it brought all of it back. All the pain was back.
So, bouncing off you, I never really liked Robb.
Oh my god.
You guys can't be friends.
No, but being seriously, I didn't really pay much attention to Robb because I'd watched the show and I'd seen season 3 before I even started reading the book. So reading him, I never found him particularly interested, and I wasn't invested in his character because of that. And then I was kind of a lot like, most of the time, because I never found him particularly interesting because, hey, Theon, he's pretty messed up. He's great to read. Right? Bran, he has crazy magical stuff going on. Sansa, she's getting abused for most of the books. It's great. But with Robb, we're not even seeing stuff through him. It's everyone around him.
He never has a POV.
Oh.
Yes. But doing this reread has made me appreciate him more. There you go. You can be happy about that.
Yes.
I found him more interesting doing this. There you go.
I always liked him just because, like, I don't know. I've been like a 15-year-old guy, and like he's got his shit together. Like I was such a little obnoxious shit that like, it's just impressive that he's able to like be so, military minded and like fairly just. And yeah, he fucks up, but like everyone does. What are you gonna do?
But see, Matt, he's almost a man grown. No wonder why.
Yeah, no, I'm 20 years older than him, barely a man grown. So
15 in Westeros isn't exactly like 15 in the United States.
I'm just gonna say it also, this kid was a prodigy. Like, he could have been, like, on the battlefield, he could have been the next Randall Tarley. Like, this dude was, he never lost. He never lost,
that's true.
In saying that, I wouldn't necessarily say he's that much of a prodigy because you have what Ned and Robert did when they weren't that much older. They were, about 19?
Yeah, but
and you have Stannis, who I think was only 17 during the Robert's Rebellion.
Yeah, Robert's a legend. He was a badass.
Yeah, and he lost a battle.
Yep.
Well, didn't.
Yeah, one.
Well, I mean, that's the whole like foreshadowing when they're at what's his fucking name? Like Tristan Mudd or whatever, Christopher Mudd, the king that won 99 battles and lost his 100 and died.
Yeah, at Old Stones.
Yeah, so I mean, you can win every battle and then just obviously get slaughtered at dinner.
Ugh. Yeah, but it does speak to Robb's capability as a commander in war that they had to resort to assassination tactics to take him out of the game. So although he did a lot of that himself. So
like,
to be fair,
the great Tywin Lannister with all of his army, all of his gold, everything. Like, this dude was getting outfoxed by a 16-year-old.
It's so great because like the first time like Tywin mentions him is like, oh, the young wolf wants to like play with the lions, like we'll show him. And then at the end he's like, the young wolf like kept his like shit together too well, we couldn't get to him, so we had to, you know, orchestrate this red wedding. Like he was too good on the field. Like it's impressive.
So yeah, he was a good commander, a good warrior, but was he also a good king?
No.
I don't think he ever got to be a king. Like he wasn't doing, you know, legislating laws or anything.
The only ruling we have from him is like the whole Karstark issue, and also what to do with Kat after she frees Jaime. But those are both really difficult and extreme situations.
I guess we never really talked about the Karstark thing, really. What do you guys think of his decision?
Well, he had to do it. It sucks, but at that point, nothing was gonna like make anything better for him, right?
Yeah, I agree. He had to take him down.
Yeah, and Karstark had already sent his men away before he had killed the children, so it wasn't even like Robb would lose his men if he killed Karstark.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They all snuck away during
they
the
stole
night.
away. Yeah, in the night.
Wow, that's a detail I did not know. I thought that they left after he beheaded Karstark.
No, they left.
We just read that chapter in the reread, so I remember this.
Yeah.
Dude.
But with
right.
that as well,
Wow.
Robb only had 3 choices. He could pardon Karstark, kill Karstark, or have him as a hostage. And those were really probably his only choices.
Well, he could also exile him as well. I mean, technically, if he sends his men away, he's deserting, so he could exile him off.
Him too.
Right, because if he's a deserter, doesn't he get beheaded anyway? Like the guys from the Night's Watch? Like,
yep.
If you're willing to break trust that hard, like, what else are you willing to do? Just get rid of him?
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of like, you know, characters throughout the story who, you know, have either lost or done something wrong, and then they've been like sent off to Essos in exile for X number of years or whatever. So I mean, it's another option for him. I'm not saying it was the one that Robb was going to do, obviously, but it's another option that would have been on the table for him, or could have been.
It is actually, and that would probably have been the best one, actually. Why didn't anyone think of it? Or
yeah, at the time.
Yeah.
Well, because he was being advised by Kat, and
Kat actually didn't have any opinions. It was Edmure who kept saying, keep him, like, pardon him or have him as a hostage, and Robb kept saying, look, I have to kill him. And then Kat was just like, whatever you say, bro.
Yeah, and Brynden agreed with Robb, right? So that was probably...
Yeah.
He's the one with the most influence over Robb right now, so... If he agrees, then that's what Robb is going to do.
By the way, why didn't Robb actually have Brynden as being the commander instead of Bolton? There you go. That was one of my points from earlier, but I forgot about it.
I would have suggested putting Karstark in command, but I don't know.
I think Robb needs Brynden because he really trusts him, and he needs someone who he can discuss strategy with.
Yeah, he needs a right-hand man.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, more importantly, Brynden is also from the Riverlands and Riverrun. So if he's going to go lift Riverrun, then yeah, he needs to have Brynden there to, you know, give him the intel on the lay of the land and things like that and how he needs to go about it. So that's really why Brynden can't really go off and, you know, command the forces that Roose is commanding.
But the thing is, Brynden hasn't been there for I don't know how many decades, right? Ever since Lysa married Hoster Tully, he's been
Lysa married her dad?
No, when Lysa married...
I do not want to be part of your shipping episode now.
When Lysa married...
Dad?
Did I say Hoster Tully? Sorry.
Yeah, you said Hoster Tully.
John Arryn. Oh, sorry. I meant John Arryn.
Obviously.
When she married John Arryn and left for the Eyrie, that Brynden basically left with her, and this is when he comes back with Kat. So, you know, it's not like he's been there all this time that he has to be there now. He's not the Lord of Riverrun. He can be the commander-in-chief of the armies, especially when they're joined like Riverland and Northern armies. So
Right, but he knows Riverrun inside and out more so than anybody else Robb has, especially from a tactical and military point of view. So he'd be the best one to go with him. Like it just doesn't make sense strategically for him to send him with Roose. I mean, he could have, but he's going to be far better served by taking him along.
After Riverrun is taken, that's, that kind of frees him up.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe it's one of those things where you're just so comfortable, working with a team of people that's been very successful that you don't want to sort of break the team until it doesn't work anymore. So
yeah, and at this point, Roose had been very apparently Roose had been very loyal. Like he'd done exactly as Robb had asked him. So to remove him from his very influential position and put someone from his own family there might have offended him.
It possibly would have. Why do you think Roose turned on Robb?
For the advancement of his house.
Yeah.
He saw a lost cause, and I think he was always, and we've had this discussion before, but it was like, I think he, like, from day one, he was always like, House Bolton's going to rise in the ranks, like, in the north, regardless, because that's why he sends, like, all of, like, Seaguard's men to, like, perish while his men are okay. Like, he does things to maintain his power and increase it while diminishing others. And this, and as the war like goes on and he sees a losing Robb, he makes like the ultimate power grab.
And the Boltons and the Starks have been fighting for thousands of years, so it's not something that happens suddenly. I mean, a Bolton betraying a Stark is not something that we should be totally shocked at. This is what they've been trying to do for so long.
Yeah, they still have Stark skin capes like in the Dreadfort, right?
Yep.
And when do you think the Freys and the Boltons started teaming up? Do you think that was just when Robb got hitched to Jane that they fully teamed up? Because I know it was very soon after that. And when do you think they decided to ally with the Lannisters? Because you had Walder Frey say that he'd never go with the Lannisters unless Tywin asked him to.
Yeah, I think it's probably when Roose got a Frey bride, right? That's when they kind of cemented everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that Walder Frey would have sided with the Lannisters unless he absolutely had to. I mean, because he was surrounded by like Stark forces, right? Yeah. So he wouldn't just give it up. But he would have only done it after Robb married Jane.
I'd say he's definitely in when he lets Jaime Lannister go from Harrenhal.
Even before that.
Yeah, the chapter before that, you had a lot of hints about it, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, when he sends part of his army to get smashed at Duskendale, knowing very well that it's a useless move.
He did that on purpose. Like, that was definitely to weaken Robb's forces, though.
Yeah.
Well, I can see him doing that just to, weaken some of his rivals in the north as well, but, and that's fair enough, hey guys, go have fun over there, good luck. See you when you get back home, But as far as like, doing something that you're fully committed to, the betrayal, it's definitely the minute that he lets Brienne and Jaime Lannister go back to King's Landing.
It's been quite long already, so we can do a little bit of alternate history stuff, like what would have happened if he hadn't sent Theon to Pike.
Okay, if he didn't send Theon, who else would he have sent? Because Catelyn was busy. What lord do you think he would have sent?
I just thought he might have sent the Great John because he's so loud that might have worked with the Iron Islanders, but I don't really know whether or not it would have.
So. Because Balon Greyjoy seems the kind of guy to get offended very easily, right? And the Greyjoy can be quiet. Like he's not the most subtle of people, so it'd be very easy to offend the Greyjoys.
But then again, Balon is very much with the Reaving Way, and like to get something you have to earn it, and I think the Great John might represent that the most out of the people Robb has at his disposal.
Okay, now the person I'm thinking would be most likely would be Luce, because Luce is
because he's so manipulative.
Yeah, and he's also the only one that if the Ironborn took them hostage, we didn't have anyone to ransom him to.
That's actually a really good point.
So it may have turned out a lot better if he just sent Roose instead.
And if Roose does get captured, it's all good.
Yeah.
Because you won't have him stabbing you in the back.
And
Yeah,
then
but-
the stars can just claim the Bolton lands.
He was stabbed in the front, to be fair.
That is pretty interesting because if Theon doesn't go to the Iron Islands, then Balon probably, I mean, his choice on attacking Stark is a 50-50 bet because he raids the north, but it's Theon who takes Winterfell. So that means Bran and Rickon are never, routed from Winterfell. So Robb's legacy is actually really, really secure.
Ramsay still stays in his jail, and
I think what this discussion shows is that there are a lot of things that went wrong, and sadly enough, if only one of those didn't happen, like either Theon didn't go to Pike, or he didn't marry Jane, or Edmure didn't fuck up, it might have been okay.
I think one question that's worth asking is if Theon doesn't go to Pike, and then Balon still raids the north, does Robb execute Theon?
Yes.
God, I hope so.
I don't think so.
How
What do you
could he
think?
when he's grown up with Theon being an older brother for him for most of his life? I don't think he would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
I think it would have been hard for him.
Yeah, but he
There-
has
And
to.
also, what's the point? Like, once he has executed him, how's that gonna stop Balon Greyjoy from doing anything?
Because it sets a bad precedent.
Yeah, but if anything, he needs to keep him as a hostage,
Because
even
as
though
soon
it
as-
doesn't seem to be very helpful.
as
Well, a
soon as he
hostage that doesn't
kills-
work is useless.
As soon as he kills Theon, he has nothing to hold over the Iron Islands at all.
Yeah.
Completely nothing. Whereas if he goes and he is able to kill Balon Greyjoy, he can put, or hopefully try to put, Theon on the throne, and then that way you have one of your own vassals being in charge, and then the Starks would be in a greater position.
That's a good point. Kill off Balon, and then establish Theon as the new king of the Iron Islands, because that's what he was offering to Balon. And then Theon, who was on board with Robb's plan of going and raiding Lannisport from the sea, probably moves forward with that. Yeah, that's actually a good idea. Although I would love to read that scene, like Theon going, "Oh shit, Robb, please don't fucking kill me." I swear to God, I didn't know my dad was gonna do that shit. Please.
I haven't seen him in 10 years. Please.
I was only 8 fucking years old.
Anyone has anything to say about Robb?
I love
I
him.
had-
I love him so back.
I had a point that actually wraps in on why Robb's a shitty king.
What? No.
Yeah, it's because he doesn't actually listen. Like, he only listens to what people are saying explicitly, but not what they are implicitly telling him, if that
What?
makes sense.
Oh, I'm confused.
As in,
He
he'll
doesn't
only
leave
listen to
behind
what
the
someone's
lines.
saying, but not to their body language, and he doesn't think about his vassals' motivations for doing anything.
So this whole time, Roose Bolton's just been doing hard eye rolls, and Rob's like, I wonder what he's doing right there, huh?
No, but Karstark has been.
Actually, we don't. Like, it's tough to say because we're never in Robb's mind, so we don't know all the steps he goes through to make a decision.
I
And
think
I
of
feel
mine's him just going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, over and over again.
But see, we in the very very early chapters, we do see that Robb, because of his slightly more sheltered upbringing, is a worse judge of character than Jon.
You see it a lot in the early chapters.
Yeah. In the very first Bran chapter, we see, Robb says, "Oh, he died very bravely," but then Jon says, "No, he was terrified." But
And Robb actually
does that.
brushes off what Jon says and rides off and has a competition with
Yeah.
Jon about getting somewhere faster.
And then again with Tyrion, Robb is very, very hostile to Tyrion, right? But Jon quickly catches on that Tyrion is actually a pretty decent guy.
John is hostile to Tyrion, like, right off the bat. Like, when
Oh,
Tyrion's
he is.
insulting him on that way up, like, Ghost, like, tackles his ass.
Oh yeah,
So,
yes,
I mean,
yes.
and
Initially,
this, I mean, Robb has a reason for being hostile to Tyrion because, Bran's woken up and Kat's come out of her, crazy state, and she was like, yeah, we think that it was Tyrion who, or one of the Lannisters who tried to kill Bran. So at least Robb has a good motivation for being hostile.
See, but then Tyrion does try to help Bran, but that doesn't really change Robb's opinion. Whereas John, once he talks to Tyrion, he realizes that Tyrion isn't that bad.
Nadia, jumping off from your point, sorry, quickly,
Yeah.
with Tyrion, Bran, and Robb in that scene where Robb has his sword on his lap, Bran is actually the one who calls off the direwolves when they go to attack Tyrion. Bran is the one who says no first, and Robb only stops them after Bran has told Summer to stop and to come here. That's when he stops Grey Wind, and then they get Rickon to stop Shaggydog.
That's a good point, because Robb being the head of Winterfell and the eldest also seems to be sort of the pack leader, as Grey Wind seems to be. So I think through the Warglink, the direwolves are kind of reacting off his hostility towards Tyrion, because they come right into the hall and they're immediately hostile towards Tyrion.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. After that scene, and Tyrion has given them the blueprints for the saddle, Robb's actually very confused about it. And I have a quote. So Robb says, "Is this some trap, Lannister? What's Bran to you? Why should you want to help him?" And he's very confused about it, and he doesn't seem to understand why anyone would want to help Bran. And yeah, I just think Robb isn't terribly good at judging people or reading character.
Yeah, because there's a pretty obvious answer here that just maybe Tyrion is not all bad and wants to help someone who is a cripple like him.
Yeah, and as well, it's a child. Like, regardless of anything else, it's a child who has been hurt. Why wouldn't you want to help them?
Good point.
This is Westeros, though.
That's true. When you actually see the reaction from the Bannermen and Bannermen's sons when Bran is presiding over dinner one day and he hears everyone saying they'd rather die than live like that, and how can you live as a cripple and he never walk again. And so I think in this society, even having the idea that something could be done about Bran's condition is kind of a not obvious thing to happen.
Definitely. And in saying that, it was the Karstarks who said that, and then they got killed, so fair's fair. With the Karstark thing later on, you actually have Rickard constantly saying that he hates the Lannisters. He's walked out of meetings before about what will happen to the Lannisters because he's so mad and stuff, and that's constantly happening. And the reason why he agrees with Great John Umber about making Robb King of the North is because he'd never bend the knee to a Lannister. And then Cat goes and releases Jaime, and then Rickard goes and kills the two kids because of that. So I actually think Robb was just being incredibly clueless about it. And so was Cat, not thinking about what would happen.
I think Cat is so consumed by her worry about her own children that she's not considering Karstark's feelings at all.
I kind of disagree on that, only because, like, right after the Battle of the Whispering Wood, Robb immediately realizes that Lord Karstark is gonna want revenge upon Jaime. And he orders him, like, taken away and, like, under guard. So I kind of disagree on that one aspect. I don't think Robb really suspected that he would go after, squires.
But as well, in that case, wouldn't you notice if one of your bannermen had reached that boiling point that they were going to tip over? If someone was that mad about something that they were planning this, you'd think that someone would realize.
Maybe, but then again, I mean, it's war, so, it changes people. So it even changes Robb, too. Like, he stops being so wishy-washy after his first battle, and he starts becoming more confident and more self-assured.
Thanks everyone for listening. You can find us as usual on A Podcast of Ice and Fire forums, on Facebook, on iTunes, our WordPress page, and YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe, comment, and let us know what you thought about this. Thanks everyone for being here for this discussion. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did. And well, I guess we'll see you next time.
Who are you, the proud lord said, that I must bow so low? Only a cat of a different coat, that's all the truth I know. A coat of gold, a coat of red, a lion still has crows. And mine are long and sharp, my lord, as long and sharp as yours. So he spoke, and so he spoke, the Lord of Casterfield. And now the rains we bore his wall, and no one there to hear. And now the rains we bore his walls, and not a soul to